just listening to what Carol said, what would be some of the first things you would say?
Yeah. So one of the, I think, counterintuitive things about these chatbots is they're actually rife with confirmation bias. And that's where hallucinations come from. For example, a very common prompt. How many times does the word tea appear in Rappler? And you'll find out it will say, 12 times, 3 times, because it looks to please you. And then you say, no, it doesn't really appear there. Can you give me a more proper result? And then the chatbot will figure out, okay, so it wants me to be critical. Then it'll give you, no, the word T doesn't, the letter T doesn't appear in Rappler. So that's a problem on both fronts. Number one, on the prompting, if you trigger a chatbot intentionally to say something bad, most of the time it will do something bad. And then second, a more subtle issue is how they were trained. Because obviously to come up with text.
Sorry, who's
trained?
Who?
The authors of the chatbot,
okay.
like OpenAI, to develop something that can write sensible sentences, they had to ingest a lot of text. And that apparently, evidently, contained a lot of bias, notwithstanding the copyright issues. So I feel as newsrooms, you have to be mindful of those two things, that they were trained with biased data, and a lot depends on how you trigger them. And I think that's where a lot of work, let's say in OpenAI and abroad, has been on trying to re-engineer these chatbots with guardrails, and that has resulted in things like Gemini, where it's inherently biased, pa rin on the opposite side. But I think that's where policy should come in. That's where process should come in. So I feel that things like there's the Paris Charter for journalists a couple of months back. That's really where responsible use, acceptable use comes in. So be mindful of the bias, be mindful of prompting them the wrong way. But otherwise, feeding them the right information solves most of the issues. That's why I'm a big fan of, guided chatbots as opposed to like open chatbots.
I got the impression after our panel discussion a couple of weeks ago that we had many questions that were specific to practical use. Which should I use for transcribing, for doing the social media, and so on. Listening to you just now, in response to what Carol said, is it correct for me to say that what you're saying is that you should have this little talk first with each journalist? Hey, these are the limits. There's this confirmation bias, and there's also the matter of training before we go out and experiment with the different apps.
Actually, what's happening now is because it's really hard to train that instinct from scratch. Is the authors of apps are essentially just putting a layer on top of a chatbot, so it's not free for all. And there's a predefined number of functions, and the prompts are already pre-programmed. So if it's a transcription bot, it's essentially just a front end to a chatbot, but specifically for transcription. And maybe, in the long run, that's a more viable approach. But using a general purpose chatbot can still be very good, especially if you're in research. You want to be you don't want to have too many limitations in your inquiry. Just be conscious that, those flaws exist. And that's also the potential for misuse, right? I mean, it's nice to be able to write any text, but then that opens the door to plagiarism, something like that. It's nice to be able to generate any image, but that opens the door to identity theft. I mean, two sides of the same problem.